Hi, welcome to Red Pepper's continuing webinar series on experience management. I'm Rob Hinckley. I lead the marketing team here at Red Pepper. In our webinar series, we invite experts to come share with us insights that will help you connect with your customers and employees in more meaningful ways. I also want to welcome those who watch this webinar in the future. We're grateful for your time and connection. By way of context, here at Red Pepper, sorry, we had a technical glitch there, but I think we're live, so we're going to keep going. We are a full experience management consultancy with full implementation, engineering, and advisory services for your experience management programs. We work both at the corporate and enterprise levels, helping customers with both technical and strategic needs. And we strive to add value at every stage of the experience management, from journey mapping, custom engineering, technical account management, training, and program design. It's my opportunity this morning to introduce our presenter, and I will also be moderating the Q&A at the end of the event. Please drop your questions in the chat, and we will get to those. Today, we're pleased to welcome Zack Sneider, who is our own head of advisory here at Red Pepper. Zack has more than 15 years of experience in all aspects of market research, and he was most recently at Qualtrics, where he was a Design XM and BX solution strategist, generating actionable insights to help Fortune 500 customers create organizational change. In his role as head of advisory here at Red Pepper, Zack leads a deep bench of expert advisors in CX, EX, and market research. Zack's role further solidifies our commitment as a company and our position as a premier partner for all XM services. Today, Zack's presentation is titled, "You're Doing It Wrong, Common Market Research Mistakes." Zack, welcome to the webinar. Please dive in with your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rob. One thing that Rob didn't call out in the intro that's probably relevant here is that prior to working at Qualtrics, I had a 15-year career in market research. It was actually my first job right out of college. And in those 15 years, I touched a whole lot of areas. I built questionnaires, I generated reports, I conducted IDIs as a moderator. So I got to work on a lot of different projects. And as much as I hate to admit it, I made a lot of mistakes as well. But I think that's pretty important to the whole process of learning. The title of this is "You're Doing It Wrong," and that's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek title there. Hopefully it'll generate some buzz and make people excited to watch this. But I'm sure that we're out there doing a lot of good research, but that doesn't mean we're not making small mistakes along the way. And these kind of mistakes can be exacerbated when we're super busy, we have 10 conflicting projects that we're working on, or anytime we wade into the waters and try something new. But my hope is that the 4 common mistakes I'm calling out today are A, somewhat tactical, and B, a little philosophical as well. I'm not going to harp on building the perfect question type, avoiding double barrel things, avoiding leading questions. We've heard that a million times already. I'm also not going to talk about how to keep AI out of our surveys because, quite frankly, I don't have any solutions for that. But I can draw on my experience and the mistakes I've made along the way to hopefully provide some interesting things to talk about today. So the first common mistake I'd love to call out here is getting distracted in the research process. And I liken this to that situation we've all been in, where you're driving down the highway and all of a sudden you sort of come to and realize you haven't really been thinking about driving for the past 15 minutes. You know, you've traveled a bunch of miles, time has passed, you've kept your lane, you haven't crashed the car, but you've just sort of been on autopilot. You haven't really been thinking about the decisions that you're making on the road. You might be stuck behind a car that's going, 20 miles an hour slower than you're intending to go, but you're kind of going through the motions and getting most things right. And unfortunately, I think there are parallels to this in the research world. We get so mired down in the process. And again, maybe because we're new to this and we have to really focus on hitting those milestones, or maybe it's because we've done this a trillion times. We're really busy and we can almost do market research with our eyes closed. But what we tend to do is just go on that autopilot and we stop thinking about what we're doing and we stop being curious. And what we tend to lose in that process is our laser focus on our objectives, right? Because that's truly while we're doing the research. That's while we're pouring time into these projects. That's why we're devoting resources. That's why we're calling upon respondents to help us give feedback, is because we have business problems that we want to solve. But all too often, we kind of forget about those and we get distracted. What does this look like? This looks like needing to pull together a questionnaire. So you pull up 6 surveys of questions you asked before, you grab a couple, paste them over, and you've got almost your whole survey done. Super efficient, but maybe those questions that you would ask in the past aren't the best questions to ask for our current objectives. We go through the process, we pull in opinions based on that survey, we get our results back, we build these reports that are fast and efficient. Maybe it's 1 question per slide directly in survey order. And that's it. It's just a regurgitation of those variables. What we're skipping is the fun part, and probably the most important part as well, which is being curious, being thoughtful, applying our brains, and really trying to get to the bottom of what we need to get to meet those objectives. Also, in this process, we end up piling questions on our respondents. Curiosity is rewarded to a point. That's why I got into market research, right? I love being curious. I love really digging deep, getting into it and trying to solve those problems. But as with anything in life, you can reach those diminishing returns. And if we don't have that laser focus on our objectives, we tend to take that shotgun approach where you throw 100 different questions at respondents when maybe 20 will do. And as I was thinking about this on the treadmill last night, actually, I started thinking about this in a way I've never thought about it before, which is what's the total human cost of the surveys we're putting out into the world? We always think about our N size, right? Our number of respondents. We think about our length of interview, but I've never really done the math to kind of see that through. So if you think about what would look like an average size survey, maybe a base size of 400, maybe about 12 minutes in duration, that's 80 hours of time that people are sitting there thinking about your questions and answering surveys. And that number is probably even bigger when you count the people that screen out of your survey, that drop out halfway through. That's so much time, right, that we're asking of the world to get these surveys answered. So I think it's our responsibility to keep these as concise as possible to meet those objectives. When we don't do that, when we add too many questions, we end up with these overstuffed reports where we display every single question, we cut it a million ways, and we think we're doing a great job because of this. Because A, we feel a duty to all those people that have worked so hard to answer our surveys that we don't want to leave any insights on the table, no matter how big or small they might be. And B, we want to make sure that we're giving our stakeholders as much as possible for their investment in this project. But really, in this case, I think more tends to be less. We're actually obfuscating our results. If we have a key insight in a report, but it's buried on slide 43 or even slide 86, I think we've lost the plot a little bit. And if our executive summary is a big wall of text or maybe several walls of text, again, I think we've lost the plot. We have to be really careful with some of those findings that are interesting, but maybe not relevant to our objectives. And we have to be even more careful with those things that are not interesting and not relevant. Just because it exists does not mean it needs to go into the report. So how do we stay focused? I think like a lot of the research process, you have to have your end goal in mind at the very beginning. So anytime you're starting with a research project, let's make sure we have some business problems that are clearly stated. What are we trying to solve or understand in this research? We should then craft very specific research objectives that ladder up to those business problems. Another thing that often gets skipped is generating hypotheses. I love hypotheses. They make me way more excited for the results to come back in, because then you can figure out, was I right? Was I wrong? Was I way off base? It feels great to be proven right, to have your thoughts and opinions be validated by the research. And even when you're wrong, when you reach that null hypothesis, there's still something to be learned about that. And if you can get your teammates and your stakeholders generating hypotheses right along with you, I think that'll make your objectives better, and it'll make everyone more excited for those results to come back in. Lastly, we have to ensure that every question that we have is aligned with our objectives. How do we do this? Well, I think it's key to not lose track of them throughout the research process. Again, don't end up on the highway totally hypnotized by the road. We have to be making conscious decisions all the way through. A great way to do that is to put your objectives right at the top of your survey. This could be in your Word document. This could be in some descriptive text in Qualtrics, but make sure that they're there and always on hand, just so you can check against that to make sure, A, am I adding the right stuff to meet those objectives? And B, do all these other questions really have a place in this research? Also, make sure that you include those objectives in your end reports as well. Make sure your executive summaries speak directly to this. This is the whole reason why you did the research. So we got to make sure those points are well covered. And an interesting thought experiment here is if you took any of your recent market research reports, read through them, and then tried to guess what the objectives were. If you can't do that, then maybe your report is a bit more aimless than it needs to be. So try to keep that in mind. Could someone, a third party, someone impartial, know what this research is trying to do just by looking at the report? And if they can't, it's a good sign you got to retool your process. Common mistake number 2 is boiling the ocean. Man, do we try to do too much all within the scope of one survey? I can remember being pressured as a researcher to do a concept test where we had a sequential monadic design. We're testing 5 different concepts. We're doing text highlighting exercises for each one to make sure we understand the words that work and the words that don't. And let's put a bonus max diff in there as well, just for fun. That's entirely too much in one survey. Again, it kind of creates an aimless experience in your reports, and it's just overburdened the respondent more than we have to. The reasons why this happens is pretty clear. We all have limited research budgets, and we want to be able to garner as many insights as we can to create the greatest organizational change. But I would argue overstuffing your surveys is counterproductive. Another key reason why we end up with too many questions is the sheer number of stakeholders that are sometimes involved. Sometimes you have 5 extra cooks in the kitchen. Each one of them brings their own 6 questions that they want to include. And before you know it, your research or your surveys are way off based and your surveys are entirely too long. So you don't want to design surveys by committee, which means sometimes limiting the number of stakeholders. Another key here is remembering that good research always leads to more questions. And that's not a bad thing. I would argue that's a really good thing. As you're interpreting results and thinking really deeply about things, you may end up in avenues that you never expected to be. And these are things that you can't always forecast ahead of time when you're trying to build that survey. What this means is that we should really lean into this. We should be writing short, snappy surveys, and we should be iterative in our process. We're very used to getting good results in maybe 5 to 6 weeks off of one big survey, but maybe we can get better results from 2 surveys over 7 weeks. That might be a bit of a culture change, but I think you'll be better for it because then you can think deeper, you can ask those follow-ups, and you can basically learn, find out the unknown unknowns at the start of the research, and ask more questions to further solidify your understanding. Common mistake number 3 is skipping qual. We're really used to qual being very slow moving. We're used to it being pretty costly. We have to acknowledge that it's not statistically valid. And we know that sometimes people can really over-rotate on a couple really strong quotes. So maybe we should skip qual. I would say there's an emphatic no, we should not be skipping qual. This was hard for me to understand. I started my career in market research with a quant brain, and I had it hammered into me that you have to make statistically valid findings, and you have to have numbers behind it, and you can't be squishing your writing. It has to be strictly in line with what the data supports. Then I had to work on a qual project, and it kind of broke my brain a little bit because all of a sudden things are really squishy. It's hard to really state conclusive findings based on what these 30 people are telling you. There's all these emotions floating around in there, which I was not used to at all. But over time, I saw the value to the point where I enrolled in the class to become a moderator and start running focus groups and doing the analysis myself, because there is so much value in qual. It's admittedly not a perfect methodology for every situation, but man, it can be really valuable where it counts. It's an absolutely phenomenal way to really establish foundational knowledge about something you want to learn. You're in that stage where there's too many unknown unknowns, and you're just trying to figure it out, get your bearings. That's the point of the survey. But how can you be so sure you can write good research questions without knowing anything about the topic? Let's talk to some people. Let's get into the weeds. Let's sort of immerse ourselves in the world we want to research. And you'll see that it has so many positive benefits in the way it'll influence the quantitative research that comes later. It's a great way to generate hypotheses. You might find some oddball behaviors among the 30 people you talk to, and it makes you wonder, is that oddball behavior, or is there a lot of people around the world doing this exact same thing? You would never know unless you took the time to do the qualitative. So you can generate hypotheses, you can have that be relevant to your objectives, and then you can test them later on in your quantitative research. A great example of this, and when I say that qual is absolutely crucial, is for attitudes and usage studies. When you talk to people before building your survey, you can hear the language that you use. So your survey can be reflective of the way people are actually talking and thinking about these things. You can get a handle on what are some of the pain points, triggers, barriers, key buying factors that are floating around in people's heads. And you can use those to populate your response options. Otherwise, you're just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping some of the response options stick. But this way, we're using actual pain points, actual barriers, actual triggers out in the world that we can then validate and get some incidences around later. Another huge benefit to doing qual is you can add tone and texture to your research. That adds feeling, that adds humanity. And that was sorely missing from my process for a very long time, where I would show up to companies and do a 50-minute presentation where I would just hit people in the head with bar chart after bar chart after bar chart. And you could see people's eyes were glazing over. You could see that their minds were not in the room, even though their bodies still were. And I was trying to think, man, what's going on? I did all this work. I know how my findings are really strong. These bar charts are stunningly beautiful. Why aren't people paying attention to this? It's because the story wasn't there. I think humans are just hungry for stories. When you have free time and you turn on Netflix, you're not going out in search of 50-minute presentations full of bar charts, right? We want stories, we want emotions, we want feelings, we want surprises. We want to feel something. And you can't feel something from bar charts in the way that you can from actual people. But when I changed my tune a bit, started integrating qual, maybe I would get video responses, maybe we'd do some qualitative findings and pull those quotes in. That's when you can really make those connections. It makes everything so much more interesting. Then those really strong quotes that someone might over-rotate on can be validated by quantitative findings, and the two kind of support each other. So the fact part of your brain knows that this is true, and then the other side of your brain is making you feel something about it. And that's when your research will really get sticky in people's heads. that's when they'll be at home taking a shower, thinking about your presentation, when those bar charts will be miles and miles away from their heads. Remember that doing qualitative research is faster and cheaper than it's ever been. I know I was very used to having to do all research in person, which is expensive. You have to travel. You do get peanut M&Ms in the back room, so that's a big win, but everything else was kind of inconvenient in your life and not necessarily budget friendly. But there's a lot of tech platforms that allow you to do qualitative research really fast and much cheaper than before. So you don't have to dedicate $40,000 and 6 to 8 weeks to actually get one of these projects across the table. We know this instinctively, but we're just so used to doing it the old way. We kind of have to take a step back and just remember that. And COVID had a whole host of changes. I don't need to list all those out in the scope of this presentation, but they made online qualitative research so much easier to conduct. People are much more comfortable and confident talking in front of a computer like I am doing now. You no longer have to send webcams in the mail because just about everybody has them. And it's just so much easier than it was in pre-COVID days. I'll also plug Qualtrics. They have some great tools in this area to help you not only schedule the interviews, but you can conduct them. You can do analysis on the back end using AI, using automatic transcripts. So the lift on the back end is much lighter than it used to be. And having video feedback in the flow of a quantitative survey isn't new, but it's a tool that we tend to forget about. I think it's one of the most underutilized tools in our entire market research toolkit. For our last common mistake, we're going to talk about heaping unreasonable expectations on our respondents. And if you're staring at the slide, you're probably curious, why are there shrimp? That's a story I think I have to tell. So when I was young in the research world, I was doing things like checking tabs. I was doing things like checking logic and surveys and populating reports, but I still didn't have a view of what the entire process looked like. I was gung-ho, I was curious, but I didn't really understand the industry that I was in. So I joined a panel. It was called eRewards, and that has been swallowed up several times up until now. But I wanted to join and start taking surveys just so I could understand, what are different people doing? What do different surveys look like for different topic areas? And what does this feel like for the respondent? And in the flow of that, I had one of the most informative experiences in my market research career, which was a 45-minute research project about shrimp. I later put the two and two together and realized it was a brand equity study, but it was 45 minutes of answering questions about shrimp. It was, how relevant is Atlantic cod shrimp? Is Pacific cod shrimp the type of shrimp for you? How likely are you to recommend frozen shrimp to friends, family, or coworkers? It was an absolutely brutal experience. And because I was a market researcher myself who knew that data quality is important, I did not want to start straightlining the survey. I didn't want to do the Christmas tree thing. I wanted to be a good respondent and give them my full undivided attention. And after that was done, I did not want to take another survey anytime soon, and I certainly was not hungry for shrimp. But that was so instructive because I doubt that anyone else taking that survey was as gung-ho and attentive as I was. And I think that's still true today. Our attention spans are bad, and I think they're getting worse. I feel like I'm in a constant state of distraction, and it takes mental gymnastics just to stick on tasks for the things I know are important. And our surveys are super important to us as researchers. They're probably less important to our respondents. And as another way of illuminating that fact, if you think about the last time you were watching a show that you really like, were you giving it your full undivided attention? Or was your mind kind of wandering? Were you looking stuff up on your phone that felt super important at the time, but is really super unimportant? I know it's that way for me. So we should assume that our respondents are approaching these things in a pretty similar fashion. So what do we do about this? Well, we got to keep these surveys short. I think a practical limit is probably 12 minutes. 10 is probably better, and 8 is probably better than that. I get asked often, how long can surveys be? And it's so dependent on the content and everything, but shorter is better as long as you're meeting all your objectives. And this is my second time talking about this, right? It's important for respondents and it's important for us as researchers to keep these things short. We don't want to hypnotize our respondents with row grid after row grid like I had to suffer through with the shrimp study. We don't want to assume that they will give us essay length responses across several open ends and think they're going to be as detailed as we want them to be. We have to know that the amount of attention they're going to give this is not equal to the amount we hope they do, and we have to design our surveys to align with that. Also, I think we have to keep them invested. And this is admittedly hard to do with panel sample because that's fundamentally very transactional. But I think it's important to utilize your own customers in research and commit to sharing back with them what you've learned, what things will change, and then actually do the communication. One of my favorite moments in all market research, this is in stark contrast to the shrimp study I had to suffer through, was a study I did for an airline. And I did a max diff study that determined that lie flat seats were hugely important to people that were flying transcon, so that's coast to coast. 2 years, or it was about a year later, I was in a warehouse actually watching people test these different seats, rating comfort over time, comfort in different parts of their body, ability to watch a movie or get some work done or eat dinner. And from that, we understood what was the best seat from the customer perspective. And then about 2 years later, I was boarding a plane and saw that very seat up there in first class for transcon flights. Didn't sit in it on that occasion, but it was still amazing to see it was there because you feel like all that work did something, had an effect in the world. And if we can share that experience with our respondents, that's absolutely huge. That adds so much brand trust, and you'll likely get better response rates down the road. Also, we have to remember what our respondents are and what they're not. They are customers, maybe they're intenders, maybe they're members, but they are not product designers and they are not pricing analysts, right? So we can't expect them to do the jobs of people that are very competent in these particular areas. On the product design side, they can't hand over fully baked product ideas. They're going to want every amazing feature and hope that nothing will ever break. That's pretty common to hear for focus groups and things like that. But they can't tell you what products you should make. I don't think any respondent said, we need iPhones, for example. They just don't have the imagination. But they can certainly serve as inspiration and influence. So if you ask the right questions, you can find out what are barriers to using your current products? What are pain points that people run into? What delights them? What are unmet needs? And you can design amazing products around that. Also remember that they're not pricing analysts. People don't walk around with an optimal price point in their brain. People want to pay way less than we want to charge them in often cases. So to ask them, what would you pay for this? Just doesn't work. And that's especially fraught when you're doing face-to-face in-person research because no one wants to seem cheap. They don't want to have the cheapest price in the room. So there's a little bit of a social desirability there to have people add prices that may be way off base. People also don't really know what new products should be priced at. If it's brand new, they just couldn't have any idea. We're not used to naming our own prices. We're used to having prices shown to us. All this is to say there are some amazing advanced analytic techniques that can help you get at pricing without having to ask them outright. In the case of Van Westendorp, for example, you can ask people what their price ranges are, where things are too cheap, where things are starting to get expensive, and a couple other points. And from that, you can understand where the optimal price point may lie. In cases where people don't even have a clue of what these things should cost, you can use Gap or Granger, where it'll anchor them on a price. Would you take it at this? If yes, we can creep that price up. Would you take it? If yes, price goes up again. If no, price goes down. And that way you can find a break point and understand demand curves at different prices. And when things get really crunchy, when you're trying to do pricing and packaging research, you've got conjoint there. So you can use consumer decisions between different packages of products at different prices to understand what's important to them, how much are they willing to pay for different elements, and what does a marketplace look like when we make subtle or large shifts. So even though they aren't pricing analysts, they can still give you feedback that can certainly inform your pricing. So those are the 4 common market research mistakes I wanted to talk about it today. I'll kick it back over to Rob to lead that Q&A. Oh, Rob, I think you might be on mute.
Appreciate that, Zach. Thank you so much for sharing this today. I loved hearing the shrimp story. I was wondering as we were putting together the presentation what that picture was about. So it's great to hear that. I also really thought that was insightful of you to ask about the cost of research and the hours that might take from our audience as we send them survey after survey. And I was really intrigued by that conversation about how qualitative adds tone and texture and language to our quantitative data. I think that's something that we want to look at Red Pepper. There are a couple questions, and if anyone watching the stream right now has more questions, please add those. The first one is from Erica. She asks, how can we navigate the goal of clearly stating business problems and aligning our research objectives when it comes to ongoing tracking research, for example, with NPS?
Yeah, NPS is an outcome measure. It's a good thing to measure, right? Because people can really align to it. They can know what it means. But it's an outcome measure, right? So you have to be able to pull levers in order to improve that. And that, again, comes from the stuff I talked about. What are known business problems? What hypotheses do we have? Why do we think NPS is low? What potential options do we have for turning the bus around and improving it? When you have those hypotheses and when you put those in tandem with other known business problems, the objectives should start to flow from those. So you have a hypothesis that the call center is a problem. So you can start to add questions to measure the experience of the call center. Was the call resolved? Was it resolved in a happy fashion? Then you can start to really understand what those objectives are and add the questions that'll align to that. If you want to take that one step further, you look at your insights. Is there some kind of correlation going on between your call center and your NPS? A good key driver analysis will tell you that. From there, you can start to experiment, and this is where you take action to say, all right, well, for half of our customer base, let's change their call experience in this way. You can then measure NPS later on down the road and see if it's different for cohort A and cohort B. So very similar process there. Great question, Erica.
I think that leads us into the next question. This is from Sonia. It's more of a statement, but a question. As you were talking about the limitations or limiting our stakeholders, Sonia commented that that's easier said than done when that stakeholder input goes all the way to the CEO. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit, Zach.
Yeah. I wish I could sit here and say, yeah, just tell them no if they're not good questions. Him or her, I should say. But as we all know, that's not necessarily the case. We have to work within the bounds of authority and all that. So if there's some questions that come from up high that absolutely must be included in your research, maybe we can trim in other areas, right? So even though that question has to be there, you might not be thrilled about it. What else can we cut to sort of make room for that? And if you can make a strong case and say, Well, we don't find that these types of questions seem to help in surveys because of X, or we've asked this in the past and we learned Y. That can maybe give you an outlet to not include that question if possible. So totally feel your pain there, Sonia. There's some things we just have to work around. But if you can state a strong case for not including it, might help you out.
Yeah, something that we all have challenges with, I'm sure. We've got another question from Steve. I think this is a great one. It says, is it okay to send a questionnaire in advance of a focus group in an effort to use that meeting time to dive deeper on what stands out most?
I might need some clarification on that, Steve. So is that sending a questionnaire to respondents? In any case, I think it's okay to give respondents a bit of homework. Nothing too intensive, I would say, because again, we don't want to overburden these people that are giving us their thoughts and opinions. But if we can sort of seed the waters and get people thinking about things in the right way, I think that'll do well to sort of break the ice and get people moving. So I wouldn't send the responses ahead of time. We don't want people, or sorry, I wouldn't send the server or the discussion guide ahead of time. You don't want people to feel like they have to roll in with pre-prepared answers. You don't want them to sound canned, like the thing they practiced in the mirror the night before. But I think if there are some thought starters, some gentle homework, I think that is a totally acceptable move.
And Steve clarified that to say that it was the focus group members, but I think you addressed that, Zach.
Yep. Great question, Steve.
Zach, one last question for me, and again, if anyone has any other questions, please drop them in now. But I'm curious about this idea um, that we keep our objectives at the top, and that objective is in conversation with our executive teams. Um, what have you seen in servicing larger companies at the Fortune 500 and enterprise levels do really well that maybe could be adopted at smaller companies or mid-level companies?
I think the thing that changes at those enterprise level companies is just scale. They have the ability to do a lot more research. Budgets are bigger, teams are larger. More business problems usually are coming to surface that they need to then help figure out with research. So it's definitely more projects. But I think the practices are largely the same. I think no matter what size of a project, no matter what company this is for, if you can keep a laser focus on objectives, that'll help the research process so much.
Well, thank you, Zach. I think we'll conclude here. We really appreciate everyone attending. And again, Zach, we love your insights and your expertise here at Red Pepper. And we're excited for all of our customers that get the opportunity to work with Zach and the members of his team. We hope that you'll reach out to connect with us and let us know how we can help you with your experience management programs and your customer research. And especially have opportunity to work with Zach and our advisory team. We hope to see each of you at future Red Pepper webinars, and we appreciate the community that we're a part of. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.